The United States of America is the strongest power in the world without any exaggeration.
Not only do we have the largest economy in the world, we have the strongest economy in the world. We have the most productive workers in the world. And given a fair shot, given a fair chance, Americans have never, ever, ever, ever let their country down.
Almost everyone from every corner of the earth, whether from Russia or Africa, wants at least to see the greatness of America with their own eyes by visiting this truly great country. The biggest sums, the greatest minds, the strongest army in the world. There are so many areas where the USA is number one on the planet. But how did the United States of America achieve this? How did a former colony of Great Britain transform into the strongest power in the world? Over the last few centuries, we will tell you the full story of America from its very beginning to the present day. Get comfortable because you are about to dive into the fascinating history of the greatest country in the world. Part 1. Colonial America, 1607 to 1776. The history of colonial America is a fascinating tale of adventure, hardship, and the quest for freedom. It all began in the early 1600s when European powers were vying for control of the New World. The British established their first permanent colony in Jamestown, Virginia, in 1607. This settlement has marked the beginning of what would eventually become the United States. Let's explore the journey from the establishment of Jamestown to the eve of the American Revolution in greater detail. In December 1606, 3 ships, the Susan Constant, the Godspeed, and the Discovery, set sail from England, carrying 104 men and boys to the New World. They were seeking gold and a passage to the Indies, driven by dreams of wealth and the expansion of the British Empire. They landed in Virginia in May 1607, establishing Jamestown along the James River. The early years were incredibly challenging. The settlers faced a harsh environment with swampy land, brackish water, and the threat of diseases such as malaria. Food shortages and conflicts with the local Powhatan Confederacy further compounded their difficulties. Captain John Smith emerged as a critical leader during this period. His strict discipline and negotiations with the Powhatan tribe, led by Chief Powhatan, helped the colony survive its initial years. Smith's famous encounter with Chief Powhatan's daughter, Pocahontas, has become legendary, though often romanticized. Pocahontas played a role in mediating relationships between the English and the Powhatan, but the colony's survival depended on the settlers' abilities to adapt and persevere. The fortunes of Jamestown began to change with the introduction of tobacco cultivation. John Rolfe, an English settler, experimented with tobacco seeds from the West Indies and found that the Virginia soil was ideal for growing the crop. By 1612, Rolfe's tobacco was being exported to England, and it quickly became a highly profitable enterprise. Tobacco cultivation required large tracts of land and significant labor, leading to the expansion of the colony and increased tensions with indigenous peoples as settlers encroached on their lands. The labor-intensive nature of tobacco farming led to the importation of indentured servants from England. These servants worked for a specified number of years in exchange for passage to America and the promise of land or money upon completion of their service. However, this system would eventually give way to the use of enslaved Africans, who were forcibly brought to Virginia in 1619, marking the beginning of a dark and tragic chapter in American history. When Jamestown struggled and eventually found its footing, another group of English settlers sought to establish a colony based on religious freedom. In 1620, the Pilgrims, a group of separatists who had broken away from the Church of England, set sail on the Mayflower. Their destination was the Virginia colony, but rough seas and navigational errors brought them to the shores of Cape Cod in present-day Massachusetts. Realizing they were outside the jurisdiction of any established government, the Pilgrims drafted and signed the Mayflower Compact, a pioneering document that established a form of self-government based on majority rule. The Pilgrims settled at Plymouth, where they faced their own set of challenges, including harsh winters, disease, and food shortages. The assistance of the Wampanoag people, particularly Squanto, who taught them essential agricultural techniques, was crucial to their survival. The first Thanksgiving, celebrated in 1621, was a feast shared by the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag. symbolized cooperation and gratitude. In 1630, another group of English settlers, the Puritans, arrived in Massachusetts Bay. Unlike the Pilgrims, the Puritans did not seek to separate from the Church of England, but to purify and reform it from within. Led by John Winthrop, they established the Massachusetts Bay Colony, envisioning it as a city upon the hill that would serve as a model of Christian virtue and governance. The Puritans brought with them a strong sense of community and a strict moral code. Their society was characterized by a focus on education, hard work, and religious devotion. Harvard College, founded in 1636, was the first institution of higher education in America, reflecting the Puritans' commitment to learning and religious instruction. However, the Puritan society was also marked by intolerance towards dissenters. Roger Williams, a minister who advocated for the separation of church and state and fair treatment of Native Americans, was banished from the colony in 1636. He went on to establish Rhode Island, a haven for religious freedom. Anne Hutchinson, another dissenter who challenged the religious orthodoxy of the Puritan leaders, was also banished and later settled in Rhode Island. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, the English established additional colonies along the Atlantic coast, eventually forming the 13 colonies. These colonies were diverse in terms of their economies, cultures, and governance. They can be broadly categorized in 3 regions: New England, the Middle Colonies, and Southern Colonies. The New England colonies, comprising Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire, were characterized by small farms, fishing, and trade. The rocky soil and harsh climate made large-scale agriculture difficult, so the community was based more on subsistence farming, lumber, and shipbuilding. The region also had a strong tradition of town meetings and self-governance. The Middle Colonies, including New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, were known for their fertile soil and diverse population. These colonies became the breadbasket of the colonies, producing large quantities of wheat and other grains. The presence of various religious and ethnic groups, such as Quakers, Dutch, Germans, and Scots-Irish, contributed to a more tolerant and pluralistic society. The Southern colonies, consisting of Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, were predominantly agricultural, with a large plantation growing tobacco, rice, and indigo. The labor-intensive nature of these crops led to a reliance on enslaved Africans, who were subjected to brutal conditions and had a profound impact on the social and economic fabric of the South. As the colonies grew in population and economic strength, tensions with Britain began to emerge. The British government imposed a series of taxes and regulations, such as the Navigation Acts, which restricted colonial trade to benefit the mother country. These acts were designed to ensure that the colonies remained economically dependent on Britain. The French and Indian War further strained relations between the colonies and Britain. The war, part of a larger global conflict known as the 7 Years' War, pitted British and colonial forces against the French and their Native American allies. The British victory in the war expanded their territorial claims in North America, but also left them with a massive debt. To pay off this debt, the British government imposed new taxes on the colonies, such as the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act. The road to revolution. The Stamp Act, which required colonists to purchase stamped paper for legal documents, newspapers, and other printed materials, was particularly unpopular. It led to widespread protests and the formation of the Sons of Liberty, a group dedicated to resisting British policies. The slogan, "No taxation without representation," became a rallying cry for the colonists, who argued that they should not be taxed by a government in which they had no elected representatives. The Townshend Act further escalated tensions by imposing duties on imported goods such as tea, glass, and paper. In response, the colonists organized boycotts of British goods and increased their calls for independence. The Boston Massacre in 1770, where British soldiers fired into a crowd of colonists killing 5, further inflamed anti-British sentiments. The situation reached a boiling point with the Tea Act of 1773, which granted the British East India Company a monopoly of tea sales in the colonies. In protest, a group of colonists disguised as Mohawk Indians boarded British ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor, into an event known as the Boston Tea Party. The British government responded with the Intolerable Acts, a series of punitive measures aimed at reasserting control over the colonies. In response to the Intolerable Acts, colonial leaders convened the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia in September 1774. Delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies, excluding Georgia, attended, seeking to coordinate a united response to British aggression. They issued a Declaration of Rights and Grievances, asserting their loyalty to the British Crown but condemning the Intolerable Acts as violations of their rights. The Congress also called for a boycott of British goods and established the Continental Association to enforce it. Additionally, they agreed to reconvene in May 1775 if their grievances were not addressed, setting the stage for further escalation. The first shots of the American Revolution were fired on April 19, 1775, at the battles of Lexington and Concord. British troops sent to seize colonial military supplies encountered armed resistance from local militias. The shot heard round the world marked the beginning of open conflicts between Britain and the colonies. In 1775 of June, the Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia, taking on the role of the de facto national government. They appointed George Washington as a commander-in-chief of the Continental Army and began preparing for a prolonged struggle for independence. By the summer of 1776, the desire for independence has become widespread among the colonies. Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, published in January 1776, argued forcefully for complete separation from Britain, swaying public opinion. On June 7, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia introduced a resolution in the Continental Congress declaring the colony's independence. A committee, including Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert R. Livingston, was tasked with drafting a formal declaration. Jefferson, the primary author, drew on Enlightenment principles and the writings of John Locke to articulate the colony's rights to self-governance and their grievances against King George III. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, declaring the 13 colonies free and independent states. The document's eloquent assertion that all men are created equal and endowed with unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness resonated deeply and became a cornerstone of American identity. The Revolutionary War. The War for Independence was long and arduous, lasting from 1775 to 1783. The Continental Army, composed of regular soldiers and local militias, faced a well-trained and well-equipped British military. Early battles, such as the Battle of Bunker Hill in June 1775, demonstrated the colonists' resolve, but also their need for more support and resources. The war saw significant battles and campaigns across the colonies. The British captured New York City in 1776 and launched campaigns in the southern colonies, hoping to rally Loyalist support. However, the Continental Army achieved crucial victories at the Battle of Saratoga in 1777, which convinced France to enter the war as an ally of the colonies. French military and financial support proved vital to the American cause. The final major battle of the war took place at Yorktown, Virginia in 1781. American and French forces led by General Washington and French General Rochambeau besieged the British Army commanded by General Cornwallis. The British surrendered at Yorktown, effectively ending major military operations and set the stage for negotiations. The Treaty of Paris, signed on September 3, 1783, formally ended the Revolutionary War. The British recognized the independence of the United States and agreed to withdraw their troops. The treaty also established the boundaries of the new nation, extending from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River and from Canada to Florida. The period of colonial America laid the foundation for the United States in many ways. The experiences of self-governance, religious freedom, and economic development in the colonies contributed to the emerging American identity. The conflicts and compromises between different regions and cultures also highlighted the challenges of creating a unified nation. The principles articulated in the Declaration of Independence, liberty, equality, and pursuit of happiness, became central to the American ethos. The struggle for independence demonstrated the power of collective action and the determination to achieve self-determination. Did you know that Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers, was not only a salesman and inventor, but also a prolific writer? His writings, including Poor Richard's Almanac, offered practical wisdom and wit, making him a household name in both the colonies and Europe. Part 2. The American Revolution and Early Republic, 1776 to 1820. The period from 1776 to 1820 was a transformative era in American history. It began with the colony's declaration of independence from British rule and continued through the Revolutionary War, the establishment of the United States as a nation, and the early years of the Republic. This era saw the creation of foundational documents and institutions that continue to shape American life today. In the summer of 1776, the desire for independence had become widespread among the 13 colonies. Influenced by Enlightenment ideas and motivated by a series of grievances against British rule, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence on July 4, 1776. This historic document, primarily authored by Thomas Jefferson, proclaimed the colony's right to self-governance and listed their complaints against King George III. The Declaration's assertion that all men are created equal and endowed with unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness became a rallying cry for the new nation. The Revolutionary War, which began in April 1775 with the battles of Lexington and Concord, continued with significant intensity. The Continental Army, under the command of General George Washington, faced numerous challenges, including shortages of supplies, harsh winter conditions, and the superior training and resources of the British military. Key battles during this period included the Battle of Bunker Hill, the Siege of Boston, and the pivotal Battle of Saratoga in 1777. The American victory at Saratoga was crucial as it convinced France to enter the war as an ally of the colonies, providing much-needed military and financial support. The war also saw the involvement of other European powers. Spain and the Dutch Republic joined France in supporting the American cause, turning the conflict into a global struggle. Despite setbacks, the Continental Army's resilience and the strategic brilliance of leaders like Washington played a significant role in maintaining the fight for independence. Even as war raged on, the newly independent states faced the daunting task of creating a functional government. The Articles of Confederation, ratified in 1781, established the first national government of the United States. However, the Articles created a weak central government with limited powers, reflecting the colony's fear of centralized authority. The national government lacked the power to tax, regulate commerce, or enforce laws, which led to significant challenges in governance. The weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation became apparent as the new nation struggled with economic difficulties, interstate conflicts, and foreign threats. The inability to raise revenue left the government financially crippled, and the lack of a strong executive branch made it difficult to implement policies effectively. These issues highlighted the need for a more robust and cohesive national government. In response to the inadequacies of the Articles of Confederation, delegates from 12 states convened in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787 to revise the Articles. However, it quickly became apparent that a complete overhaul was necessary. The Constitutional Convention, led by figures such as George Washington, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton, worked in secrecy to draft a new constitution that would create a stronger federal government while balancing the interests of the states. The resulting document, the United States Constitution, established a federal system with a separation of powers among three branches: the executive, legislative, and judicial. It included checks and balances to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful. The Constitution also allowed for amendments, providing a mechanism for future changes and adaptations. The debate over the Constitution's ratification was intense, with Federalists advocating for its adoption and Anti-Federalists expressing concerns about the potential for government overreach. To address these concerns, the Bill of Rights, comprising the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, was proposed and ratified in 1791. These amendments guaranteed individual liberties such as freedom of speech, religion, and press, and protections against unreasonable searches and seizures and cruel and unusual punishment. With the ratification of the Constitution, the United States began the process of building a functioning federal government. George Washington, elected as the first president in 1789, set many important precedents for the office, including the establishment of a cabinet and the practice of serving only 2 terms. Washington's leadership helped stabilize the new nation and provide models for future presidents. Washington's administration faced numerous challenges, including managing the national debt, establishing a national bank, and dealing with domestic and foreign policy issues. The passage of the Judiciary Act in 1789 established the federal court system, including the Supreme Court, which played a crucial role in interpreting the Constitution and ensuring the rule of law. John Adams, Washington's successor, faced significant challenges during his presidency, particularly in foreign affairs. The quasi-war with France, an undeclared naval conflict, and the controversial Alien and Seditions Act, which restricted speech critical of the government, tested the limits of federal authority and highlighted the growing partisan divisions in American politics. Thomas Jefferson's presidency marked a period of significant territorial expansion and political change. In 1803, Jefferson oversaw the Louisiana Purchase, a landmark acquisition that doubled the size of the United States. The purchase of the Louisiana Territory from France provided vast new lands for settlement and exploration, opening the West to American expansion. The Lewis and Clark expedition, commissioned by Jefferson, explored the newly acquired territory, mapping the land and establishing relationships with Native American tribes. Their journey provided valuable information about the geography, resources, and inhabitants of the West, further fueling expansion and settlement. However, the westward expansion also brought conflicts with Native American tribes and foreign powers. The desire for new lands and resources led to a series of conflicts, including the Creek War and tensions with Spain over Florida. The drive for expansion reflected the concept of manifest destiny, the belief that Americans were destined to spread across the continent, but also highlighted the complex and often violent interactions between settlers and indigenous peoples. The early 19th century saw a continued conflict with Britain, culminating in the War of 1812. The war was fueled by issues such as British impressment of American sailors, restrictions on American trade, and British support of Native American resistance against American expansion. The war saw significant battles, including the burning of Washington, D.C. by British forces and the successful defense of New Orleans by General Andrew Jackson. The Treaty of Ghent, signed in December 1814, ended the war without significant territorial changes, but affirmed American sovereignty and strengthened national pride. The war has lasting effects on American politics and society, contributing to the decline of the Federalist Party and the rise of a new sense of American identity and nationalism. Following the War of 1812, the United States entered a period known as the Era of Good Feelings, characterized by a political unity and national growth. James Monroe, elected as president in 1816, presided over a time of economic prosperity and territorial expansion. The admission of new states and the construction of infrastructure such as roads and canals facilitated westward movement and economic development. In 1820, the Missouri Compromise addressed the contentious issues of slavery's expansion into new territories. The compromise allowed Missouri to enter the Union as a slave state while admitting Maine as a free state, maintaining a balance between slave and free states in the Senate. It also prohibited slavery in the Louisiana Territory north of the 36° 30 parallel, setting a precedent for future territorial expansion. Monroe's presidency is also notable for the Monroe Doctrine, a foreign policy statement delivered in 1823. The Monroe Doctrine declared that the Western Hemisphere was off-limits to further European colonization and warned European powers against interfering in the affairs of newly independent Latin American nations. This policy asserted American influence in the region and laid the groundwork for future American foreign policy. The period of 1776 to 1820 was the foundational period for the United States, establishing the principles and institutions that continued to define the nation. The successful struggle for independence and the creation of the Constitution provided a framework for democratic governance and the protection of individual liberties. The early republic faced numerous challenges, including economic instability, foreign threats, and domestic divisions, but it also demonstrated a resilience and adaptability of the American experiment. The territorial expansion and growth of the nation during this period set the stage for further development and conflict, particularly over the issue of slavery. The principles of liberty and equality articulated in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution would continue to inspire future generations, even as the nation grappled with the contradictions and challenges of realizing those ideals. Did you know that the Louisiana Purchase, one of the largest land deals in history, cost the United States about $15 million, or roughly 4 cents an acre? This acquisition significantly expanded the nation's territory and resources, shaping its future development and identity. Part 3. Expansion and Division. 1820 to 1865. The period from 1820 to 1865 was marked by significant expansion and deepening divisions in the United States. This era saw the nation grow westward, driven by the concept of manifest destiny, while internal conflicts over slavery and states' rights intensified, ultimately leading to the Civil War. This chapter of American history is defined by territorial acquisition, economic development, political struggles, and the profound impact of the slavery debate. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 was a pivotal moment in the early 19th century, as new territories were being settled and seeking statehood. The balance between free and slave states became a contentious issue. The Missouri Compromise allowed Missouri to enter the Union as a slave state while admitting Maine as a free state, maintaining the balance in the Senate. It also established the 36-30 parallel as the dividing line for future territories, with slavery prohibited north of this line within the Louisiana Purchase. This compromise temporarily eased tensions, but highlighted the growing sectionalism between the North and the South. As the nations continued to expand, the question of whether new territories would permit slavery became increasingly divisive. Despite the underlying tensions in the early 1820s were characterized by a small sense of national unity and purpose. Known as the Era of Good Feelings, James Monroe's presidency saw economic growth, westward expansion, and relative political harmony. Monroe's foreign policy, particularly the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, asserted American influence in the Western Hemisphere and warned European powers against further colonization or interference in the Americas. The policy laid the groundwork for future American diplomacy and reflected the growing sense of national identity and destiny. The election of Andrew Jackson in 1828 marked a significant shift in American politics. Jackson was a war hero and populist, represented the rise of the common man and the expansion of democracy. His presidency, known as the Jacksonian era, was characterized by a strong executive branch, the spoils system, and a commitment to westward expansion. Jackson's policies included the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which led to the forced relocation of Native American tribes from their ancestral lands in the Southeast to territories west of the Mississippi River. This tragic episode, known as the Trail of Tears, resulted in the deaths and sufferings of thousands of Native Americans. Jackson's presidency also saw the nullification crisis, a confrontation between the federal government and South Carolina over tariffs and states' rights. The crisis was resolved through compromise, but it underscored the growing sectional tensions and the threat of disunion. The concept of manifest destiny, the belief that Americans were destined to expand across the continent, drove the nation's westward movement. This ideology was fueled by a combination of economic opportunity, national pride, and a sense of divine mission. The Oregon Trail, the California Gold Rush, and the settlement of Texas were key events that embodied the spirit of expansion. The annexation of Texas in 1845 and the subsequent Mexican-American War resulted in significant territorial gains for the U.S. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the war, ceded vast tracts of land, including present-day California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and parts of Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, and Texas, to the United States. These acquisitions further fueled the debate over the expansion of slavery into new territories. As new territories were acquired, the question of slavery's expansion became increasingly contentious. The Compromise of 1850 aimed to address these issues by admitting California as a free state, establishing Utah and New Mexico with the status of slavery to be determined by popular sovereignty, and ending the slave trade in Washington, D.C. Additionally, the compromise included the Fugitive Slave Act, which required citizens to assist in the capture of runaway slaves and denied alleged fugitives the right to a jury trial. The Fugitive Slave Act was deeply unpopular in the North and galvanized abolitionist sentiment. It brought the realities of slavery into stark relief for many Northerners who were now legally obligated to participate in the enforcement of slavery. This act, along with the publication of Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852, intensified the moral and political debate over slavery. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, proposed by Senator Stephen A. Douglas, aimed to facilitate the construction of a transcontinental railroad and promote settlement in the territories of Kansas and Nebraska. The act repealed the Missouri Compromise by allowing settlers in these territories to determine the status of slavery through popular sovereignty. The result was a violent conflict known as Bleeding Kansas, as pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers flooded into Kansas to influence the vote. The violence and political turmoil in Kansas highlighted the deep divisions within the country and foreshadowed the coming national conflict. The Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision in 1857 further inflamed sectional tensions. The court ruled that African Americans, whether free or enslaved, were not American citizens and had no right to sue in federal court. Moreover, the court declared that Congress had no authority to prohibit slavery in federal territories, effectively nullifying the Missouri Compromise. The Dred Scott decision was a significant victory for pro-slavery forces, but provoked outrage in the North. It also influenced the political landscape, contributing to the rise of the Republican Party, which opposed the expansion of slavery. The Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858 between Republican Abraham Lincoln and Democrat Stephen A. Douglas further highlighted the national divide over slavery. Lincoln's arguments against the spread of slavery resonated with many Northerners and set the stage for his presidential candidacy in 1860. The election of Abraham Lincoln as president in 1860 was the final catalyst for secession. Lincoln's victory without a single Southern electoral vote convinced many in the South that their interests could no longer be protected within the Union. South Carolina seceded in December 1860, followed by other Southern states, leading to the formation of the Confederate States of America. Efforts at compromise, such as the Crittenden Compromise, failed to prevent the impending conflict. The attack on Fort Sumter in April 1861 marked the beginning of the Civil War, a brutal and bloody conflict that would last 4 years and claim hundreds of thousands of lives. The Civil War, Battles and Turning Points, 1861 to 1865. The Civil War was the deadliest conflict in American history. Key battles included the First Battle of Bull Run, the Battle of Antietam, the Battle of Gettysburg, and the Siege of Vicksburg. The war saw significant advancements in military technology and tactics, including the use of railroads, telegraphs, and ironclad ships. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued by Lincoln in 1863, declared all slaves in Confederate-held territory to be free. This shifted the focus of the war to include the abolition of slavery as a primary goal. African American soldiers played a crucial role in the Union war effort, fighting bravely in numerous battles and contributing to the eventual Union victory. The war's turning point came in 1863 with the Union victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg. These battles marked the beginning of the end of the Confederacy. In 1864, General William Tecumseh Sherman's March to the Sea demonstrated the South's infrastructure and morale. The relentless Union pressure led to the surrender of the Confederate General Robert E. Lee at Appomattox Courthouse in April 1865. Just days after the surrender of Appomattox, President Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer, at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. Lincoln's death shocked the nation and cast a shadow over the post-war period of Reconstruction. The Civil War fundamentally reshaped the United States. It preserved the Union and ended the institution of slavery, but it also left the South devastated and the nation deeply divided. The Reconstruction era that followed sought to rebuild the South and integrate freed slaves into American society, but it was marked by significant challenges and resistance. The period from 1820 to 1865 was one dramatic growth and profound conflict. The nation's expansion westward, driven by the ideology of manifest destiny, brought new opportunities and challenges. The debate over slavery, exacerbated by territorial acquisitions and political compromises, ultimately led to the Civil War. This era laid the groundwork for modern America. The principles of liberty and equality tested and redefined through the conflict became central to the nation's identity. The experiences of division and Reconstruction would continue to shape the nation's development and its ongoing struggle to live up to its founding ideals. Did you know the phrase manifest destiny was coined by journalist John L. O'Sullivan in 1845? It captured the belief that Americans were destined to expand across the continent, a belief that drove much of the territorial expansion and conflict of this era. Part 4. Reconstruction and the Gilded Age, 1865 to 1900. The period from 1865 to 1900 in American history is characterized by two significant eras, Reconstruction and the Gilded Age. Reconstruction was the challenging process of reintegrating the Southern states after the Civil War and addressing the rights of newly freed African Americans. The Gilded Age, which followed, was marked by rapid industrialization, economic growth, and profound social changes. This era saw both tremendous progress and deep-seated social issues that would shape the future of the United States. Reconstruction. The end of the Civil War in 1865 left the Southern states devastated. Cities were in ruins, the economy was shattered, and the social order upended with the abolition of slavery. President Abraham Lincoln had envisioned a lenient Reconstruction policy to quickly reunify the nation, but his assassination in April 1865 left the task to his successor, Andrew Johnson. Johnson's approach to Reconstruction was lenient towards the South. He quickly issued pardons to many former Confederates and allowed Southern states to establish new governments with little federal intervention. However, these governments enacted black codes to restrict the rights of freed men and maintain a system of racial subordination. Congress, dominated by the radical Republicans, opposed Johnson's lenient policies and sought to implement more stringent measures to ensure civil rights for freed men and to transform Southern society. In 1865, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, which granted citizenships to all persons born in the U.S., except Native Americans, and aimed to protect the civil rights of African Americans. This was followed by the 14th Amendment, which provided equal protection under the law and was ratified in 1868. Radical Reconstruction began in earnest with the Reconstruction Acts of 1867, which divided the South into 5 military districts and required Southern states to draft new constitutions guaranteeing black male suffrage, and to ratify the 14th Amendment before rejoining the Union as well. Federal troops were stationed in the South to enforce these measures and to protect the rights of African Americans. The Freedmen's Bureau was established in 1865 to assist formerly enslaved people in the transition to freedom. It provided food, housing, medical aid, schooling, and legal assistance. The Bureau played a crucial role in the establishment of schools and educational opportunities for African Americans, laying the groundwork for future advancements in black education and literacy. Despite these efforts, the Reconstruction era faced significant resistance from Southern whites, including violent opposition from groups like the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan and other white supremacist organizations used terror and violence to undermine Reconstruction governments and to intimidate black voters and political leaders. By the mid-1870s, the North's commitment to Reconstruction was waning. Economic troubles such as the Panic of 1873 and political scandals during Ulysses S. Grant's presidency diverted attention away from the South. The Compromise of 1877, which resolved the disputed 1876 presidential election, effectively ended Reconstruction. Federal troops were withdrawn from the South, and Southern states quickly moved to disenfranchise black voters and impose segregation through Jim Crow laws. The Gilded Age, 1877 to 1900. The Gilded Age, a term coined by Mark Twain to describe the late 19th century, was a period of rapid economic growth and industrialization. The expansion of railroads, the discovery of natural resources, and technological innovations fueled this growth. Key industries such as steel, oil, and manufacturing experienced tremendous expansion. Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan emerged as powerful industrialists and financiers, amassing vast fortunes and dominating their respective industries. Carnegie's steel empire, Rockefeller's Standard Oil, and Morgan's banking and financial interests epitomized the era's concentration of wealth and economic power. The Gilded Age saw a significant increase in urbanization. Millions of people moved to cities in search of job opportunities in factories and industries. Cities like New York, Chicago, and Pittsburgh grew rapidly, becoming bustling centers of commerce and culture. However, this urban growth also brought challenges, including overcrowded housing, poor sanitation, and inadequate infrastructure. Simultaneously, the United States experienced a wave of immigration from Europe and Asia. Immigrants arrived in search of better economic prospects and to escape political and religious persecution. They settled in ethnic neighborhoods, contributing to the culture diversity of American cities. However, they also faced discrimination and nativist sentiments, which culminated in restrictive immigration laws such as the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. The rapid industrialization of the Gilded Age led to harsh working conditions for many laborers. Long hours, low wages, and dangerous working environments were common. These conditions gave rise to labor movements and strikes as workers organized to demand better conditions and pay. The Knights of Labor and the American Federation of Labor were two significant labor organizations that sought to represent the interest of workers. Notable labor conflicts during this period included the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, the Haymarket Riot of 1886, and the Pullman Strike of 1894. These events highlighted the tensions between labor and capital and often resulted in violent clashes and government intervention on behalf of employers. The Gilded Age was also marked by political corruption and the influence of powerful business interests on government. Political machines such as Tammany Hall in New York City wielded significant power, often engaging in graft and patronage. At the national level, the presidency was relatively weak, and the Congress was dominated by powerful industrial and financial interests. Despite the corruption, the period saw the beginnings of reform movements. The Mugwumps, a group of reform-minded Republicans, sought to address political corruption and promote civil service reform. The Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act of 1883 aimed to reduce patronage and introduced competitive exams for government positions. The Gilded Age was a time of remarkable technological and cultural advancements. Thomas Edison's inventions, including the phonograph and the electric light bulb, revolutionized daily life and industry. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869 connected the East and West Coasts, facilitating commerce and the movement of people. In the cultural realm, the Gilded Age saw the rise of American literature, art, and architecture. Authors like Mark Twain, Henry James, and Edith Wharton explored the complexities of American society in their work. The Chicago World's Fair of 1893 showcased American innovation and cultural achievements, symbolizing the nation's growing confidence and aspirations. The Reconstruction and Gilded Age periods were foundational in shaping modern America. Reconstruction laid the groundwork for civil rights advancements, even though many of its gains were rolled back in the post-Reconstruction South. The Gilded Age, with its economic expansion and social challenges, set the stage for the Progressive Era reforms that would follow in the early 20th century. Did you know that the phrase Gilded Age was coined by Mark Twain and Charles Dudley Warner in their satirical novel The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today? The term reflects the era's glittering surface of prosperity and innovation, which often masked the underlying social and economic inequalities. Part 5. The Progressive Era to World War II, 1900 to 1945. The period from 1900 to 1945 in American history encompasses significant changes and challenges marked by the Progressive Era, 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and transformative social and political movements. This era witnessed the United States evolving into a global power while grappling with profound internal and external issues. The Progressive Era. The Progressive Era, spanning the early 20th century, was characterized by a broad and diverse movement aimed at addressing the social, political, and economic injustices brought about by industrialization. Reformers sought to improve living conditions, reduce corruption, and expand democratic participation. Key figures of the Progressive Era included Theodore Roosevelt, who became president in 1901 after the assassination of William McKinley. Roosevelt's Square Deal focused on trust-busting, consumer protection, and conservation of natural resources. His administration took on powerful corporate interests, breaking up monopolies like the Northern Securities Company and regulating industries to ensure fair competition and protecting consumers. Progressive reformers also pushed for labor rights, women's suffrage, and social welfare programs. The establishment of the Children's Bureau in 1912, the enactment of child labor laws, and the introduction of workmen's compensation was significant achievements. The movement for women's suffrage gained momentum, culminating in the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920, granting women the right to vote. Journalists known as muckrakers played a crucial role in the Progressive Era by exposing corruption, corporate greed, and social injustices. Upton Sinclair's novel The Jungle revealed the appalling conditions in the meatpacking industry, leading to public outrage and the passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act in 1906. Ida Tarbell's investigative journalism exposed the unethical practices of John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company, contributing to its eventual breakup. The Progressive Era also saw significant urban reforms aimed at improving living conditions in rapidly growing cities. Settlement houses such as Jane Addams' Hull House in Chicago provided social services, education, and support to immigrants and the poor. City planners and reformers worked to address issues like sanitation, housing, and public health. The progressive movement was not without its contradictions. While advocating for social justice, many progressives also supported policies of racial segregation and eugenics. These contradictions reflected the complexities and limitations of the era's reform efforts. The United States and World War I, 1914 to 1918. When World War I broke out in Europe in 1914, the United States initially adopted a policy of neutrality. President Woodrow Wilson sought to keep the nation out of the conflict, emphasizing the need for impartiality and peace. However, several factors eventually drew the United States into the war, including unrestricted submarine warfare by Germany, which targeted American ships, and the Zimmermann Telegram, in which Germany proposed a military alliance with Mexico against the United States. In April 1917, Wilson asked Congress for a declaration of war, framing the conflict as a fight to make the world safe for democracy. The United States' entry into the war provided a significant boost to the Allied powers, both militarily and economically. The mobilization for World War I required massive efforts on the home front. The government established agencies like the War Industries Board to coordinate production and ensure the supply of essential materials. The Selective Service Act of 1917 instituted a draft bringing millions of men into the armed forces. The war also saw increased governmental control over the economy and society. The Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918 curtailed civil liberties, leading to the suppression of dissent and the prosecution of anti-war activists. Women and African Americans played crucial roles in the war effort, with women entering the workforce in large numbers and African Americans serving in the military and participating in the Great Migration, moving from the rural South to industrial cities in the North. World War I ended with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. President Wilson played a key role in the negotiations, advocating for his 14 points, which emphasized self-determination, free trade, and the establishment of the League of Nations to ensure future peace. However, the treaty imposed harsh penalties on Germany, including significant territorial losses, disarmament, and reparations. The U.S. Senate ultimately rejected the Treaty of Versailles, and the United States did not join the League of Nations. This decision reflected the growing isolationist sentiment of the country and set the stage for future international challenges. The Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression. The 1920s, often called the Roaring Twenties, was a decade of economic prosperity and cultural change. Technological advancements, such as the widespread adoption of the automobile and the rise of radio and film, transformed American life. Consumer culture flourished and the stock market experienced unprecedented growth. The decade also saw significant social and cultural shifts. The Harlem Renaissance brought African American art, literature, and music to the forefront of American culture. Jazz music, with its roots in African American communities, became a defining feature of the era. The flapper, a new image of modern womanhood characterized by fashion, independence, and social freedom, symbolized the changing roles and attitudes of women. The economic boom of the 1920s came to a sudden halt with the stock market crash of October 1929. The crash triggered severe economic downturn known as the Great Depression, which lasted throughout the 1930s. The Depression was marked by widespread unemployment, bank failures, and poverty. Millions of Americans lost their jobs, homes, and savings, leading to a profound social and economic crisis. President Herbert Hoover's initial response to the Depression was limited, relying on voluntary cooperation and limited government intervention. However, as the crisis deepened, calls for more substantial government action grew louder. In 1932, Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected as president on a platform of active government interventions to address the economic crisis. Roosevelt's New Deal encompassed a series of programs and reforms aimed at providing relief, recovery, and reform. The New Deal included measures such as the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Public Works Administration, the Social Security Act, and the establishment of the Securities and Exchange Commission to regulate the stock market. The New Deal faced significant opposition and legal challenges, but it fundamentally transformed the relationship between the federal government and the American people. It expanded the government's role in the economy and introduced social safety nets that continued to impact American society. The United States and World War II, 1939 to 1945. As World War II began in Europe in 1939, the United States initially maintained a stance of neutrality, influenced by the isolationist sentiment that had grown after World War I. However, President Roosevelt recognized the threat posed by the Axis powers and sought ways to support the Allied cause without directly entering the conflicts. The Lend-Lease Act of 1941 allowed the U.S. to provide military aid to Allied nations, signaling a shift towards greater involvement. The attack on Pearl Harbor by Japan on December 7, 1941, marked the turning point. The surprise attack led to a declaration of war against Japan, followed by declarations of war against Germany and Italy, fully committing the United States to World War II. World War II required unprecedented mobilization and coordination on the home front. The War Production Board oversaw the conversion of industries to wartime production, leading to the mass production of military equipment and supplies. Rationing war bonds and volunteer efforts became part of everyday life as the nation united to support the war effort. Women again played a crucial role, entering the workforce in large numbers to replace men who had gone to fight. The iconic image of Rosie the Riveter symbolized women's contributions to the war effort. African Americans also participated actively, both in the military and in war industries, despite facing continued discrimination and segregation. The United States fought on multiple fronts during World War II. In the Pacific, key battles such as Midway, Guadalcanal, and Iwo Jima were pivotal in turning the tide against Japan. In Europe, the D-Day invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, marked the beginning of the liberation of Western Europe from Nazi occupation. The Battle of the Bulge, fought in the winter of 1944–45, was the last major German offensive and ended in a decisive Allied victory. The war in Europe concluded with the unconditional surrender of Germany in May 1945, following the fall of Britain. The War of the Pacific ended after the United States dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, leading to Japan's surrender and the end of World War II. The conclusion of World War II left the U.S. as one of the world's two superpowers alongside the Soviet Union. The war had transformed the United States into a global leader with significant political, economic, and military influence. The establishment of the United Nations in 1945 aimed to promote international cooperation and prevent future conflicts. However, the end of World War II also marked the beginning of a Cold War, a period of geopolitical tension and rivalry between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. The ideological conflict between democracy and communism would shape international relations and domestic policies for decades to come. The period from 1900 to 1945 was marked by profound changes and challenges that shaped modern America. The Progressive Era brought significant social and political reforms, addressing many of the injustices and inequalities of the Gilded Age. The experiences of World War I and the Great Depression tested the resilience of American society and government, leading to lasting changes in the roles of the federal government. World War II solidified the United States' position as a global superpower and set the stage for its leadership in the post-war world. The era's social and economic transformations, along with the challenges of the Cold War, would continue to influence American life and policy for generations. Did you know that the Social Security Act of 1935, part of Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, established the first federal social insurance program in the U.S.? It provided financial assistance to the elderly, unemployed, and disabled, laying the foundation for the modern welfare state. Part 6. The Modern Era, 1945 to present. The modern era in American history, spanning from 1945 to present, is characterized by rapid social, technological, and political changes. This period saw the United States emerge as a global superpower, navigate the complexities of the Cold War, and grapple with significant social movements and economic transformations. The nation faced both unprecedented opportunities and profound challenges as it entered the 21st century. Post-war prosperity and the Cold War. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, the United States experienced a period of significant economic growth and prosperity. The GI Bill provided returning veterans with access to education, housing, and job opportunities, contributing to the growth of the middle class. The post-war economic boom led to the increased consumer spending and expansion of industries and the rise of suburbanization. Suburbs became the preferred living areas for many Americans, symbolizing the American dream of homeownership and prosperity. The end of World War II marked the beginning of the Cold War, a geopolitical struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union. The ideological conflict between democracy and communism influenced American foreign and domestic policy for nearly half a century. The United States adopted a policy of containment aimed at preventing the spread of communism. The Cold War saw several significant events, including the Berlin Airlift, the Korean War, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Vietnam War was one of the most contentious and divisive conflicts of the era, leading to widespread protests and questioning of American foreign policy. The arms race, space race, and numerous proxy wars around the globe further defined the Cold War period. The post-war era saw the rise of the civil rights movement, a pivotal struggle for racial equality and justice. Key figures such as Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X played crucial roles in challenging segregation and discrimination. Landmark events included the Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court decision, which declared racial segregation in public schools unconstitutional, and the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act, which aimed to end segregation and protect voting rights for African Americans. The movement also addressed issues of economic inequality and sought to empower marginalized communities. The March on Washington in 1963, where Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech, and the Selma to Montgomery marches in 1965 were significant moments that highlighted the demand for social and political change. The late 20th century and the end of the Cold War. The 1970s were marked by economic challenges, including inflation, the oil crisis, and stagflation. President Richard Nixon's administration faced significant turmoil, culminating in the Watergate scandal and his resignation in 1974. The presidency of Jimmy Carter focused on human rights and energy policy, but faced difficulties with the Iran hostage crisis and economic struggles. The election of Ronald Reagan in 1980 ushered in a new era of conservative politics. Reagan's policies, known as Reaganomics, emphasized tax cuts, deregulation, and reduced government spending. His administration also took on strong anti-communist stances, increasing military spending and challenging the Soviet Union on multiple fronts. The 1980s saw significant developments in the Cold War, leading to its eventual conclusion. The policies of Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, including glasnost or openness, and perestroika, restructuring, aimed to reform the Soviet Union but also led to its weakening. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 symbolized the collapse of the communist regimes in Eastern Europe. In 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved, marking the end of the Cold War. The United States emerged as the sole superpower, with a new world order characterized by American influence and the spread of a democracy and capitalism. The post-Cold War era and the 21st century. The post-Cold War era has been defined by rapid technological advancements and the rise of the information age. The proliferation of personal computers, the internet, and mobile technology has transformed how people live, work, and communicate. Companies like Microsoft, Apple, and Google became dominant players in the global economy, driving innovation and shaping modern life. The digital revolution also brought challenges, including concerns over privacy, cybersecurity, and the impact of social media on society and politics. The rise of the gig economy and the increasing automation of jobs have reshaped the labor market and raised questions about the future of work. The end of the Cold War facilitated the process of globalization, characterized by increased trade, investment, and cultural exchange. The North American Free Trade Agreement in 1994 and the establishment of the World Trade Organization in 1995 were significant milestones in promoting global economic integration. However, globalization led to economic dislocation and debates over trade policies and their impact on workers and industries. The 2008 financial crisis was a significant economic event that had global repercussions. The collapse of major financial institutions, the housing market crash, and the resulting recession led to widespread economic hardships and prompted government interventions and regulatory reforms. The early 21st century has seen a rise of various social movements addressing issues like climate change, gender equality, LGBTQ+ rights, and racial justice. Movements like Black Lives Matter, the Women's March, and the global climate strikes have mobilized millions of people and brought attention to pressing social and environmental issues. Political polarization has intensified with deep divisions over issues such as immigration, healthcare, and economic inequality. The election of Donald Trump in 2016 and the subsequent presidency highlighted these divisions and sparked significant debate and activism across the political spectrum. The COVID-19 pandemic, which began in 2019, has had profound effects on global health, economies, and daily life. The pandemic led to widespread illness and loss of life, economic disruption, and significant changes in how people work and interact. The development and distribution of vaccines provided hope for controlling the virus, but the pandemic's long-term impacts are still unfolding. The modern era has been a time of extraordinary change and complexity. The United States has navigated its role as a global leader while facing significant internal challenges. Technological advancements, social movements, and economic transformations have shaped contemporary American society. As the nation looks to the future, it continues to grapple with the legacy of its past and the opportunities and challenges of an interconnected world. From its colonial beginnings and its current status as a global superpower, the history of the United States is a rich tapestry of struggle, innovation, and progress. Each era has contributed to the nation's development, shaping its values, institutions, and identity. The journey through American history reveals a nation constantly evolving, striving to live up to its founding principles of liberty, equality, and justice. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Until next time, and remember, a person who does not know his past has no future.